Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to discuss with you about fair by design. My talk will be pretty general because on January you will have another talk always on this topic, fair by design, but from a more practical point of view that will be held by Marco Prenassi. Just to introduce myself, who I am, my background is in physics. I did the master's degree in physics at the University of Trieste here in Trieste, and then the PhD at SISA. And I spent a couple of years doing a postdoc in Valencia at the Istituto de Fisica Corpuscolare and at the Free University in Amsterdam. While I was a physicist, I studied extension of a standard model to explain effects that goes beyond the standard model. But after the second postdoc, I decided to change life, and I spent a couple of years in a big insurance company, and that is well known, actually one of the biggest in the world, I think. And I worked for a couple of years as a data analyst. But I realized that was not my place, and I had the opportunity to have a scholarship at Verret that is Verit with his old name. And since July, I'm a research technology at the lab, that is one of the laboratory inside Verit, now RIT. And in the lab, I work mainly on topics related to the fair principle implemented to all the implementation of a fair principle in the data management in the project in which the RIT and the ARIA Institute is involved in this moment, that are PRP and other projects. The schedule of my talk is this, and actually I will start from a brief history of what is open data and open access and how we arrived to that, because what I would like to do today is a bit contextualize the concept of fair by design implementation in a lab to understand how we arrived as a scientific community to this concept and why there is a huge interest in this kind of implementation. So to do this, just start from this, and actually I found pretty interesting that the first reference to the open data research, the first reference was done more than 80 years ago by a sociologist that for the first time suggested that to study better sociology was necessary to put in common knowledge and information. Actually, I didn't know, of course, I discovered a couple of days ago. This Robert King Merton was one of the fathers of sociology as a science, that means collecting data and analyzing them and so on. And therefore, as soon as they had data, they realized it was necessary to share information in order to achieve better results. However, only after 50 years, more or less, the first time the words open data appeared in a scientific context, we arrive at a report done by the one American scientific agency that was addressing the problem of climate change. Again, there was a global phenomenon that had to be addressed, face off, and they suggested again that to solve that big problem was necessary to share knowledge, to share information, and to share data. Of course, when we arrived around the 2000 and with the increase of internet facilities, and we enter in the internet era, there is a speed up of all the concepts related to open access, open data, open knowledge. And because the idea that, and it becomes more and more strong stronger the idea that the scientific publication should be free for all the community. Indeed, in 2001, we have the first definition of what is open access, and we arrive in the year, in a couple of years, to the introduction of the Creative Commons licenses, and also to the declaration. We pass from the definition of what is open access to the first proposal to open also the research of data. In the same years, we assist to other movement, open movement that goes in the direction of showing, of opening data, public data, thanks to the internet. And there is the community push to give to the public the access to data that are collected in order to invoke a sort of transparency of with respect transparency from the governments. Actually, I think this is pretty interesting because it contextualizes the fact that the data research, the interest in open the research data is not belongs to something bigger, to an interest in opening public data more in general. And indeed, to speed up all the discussion, indeed, to more or less 10 years ago, there is for the first time at the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, there is the idea, it is promoted idea to put an end to the bibliometric parameters as indicators to decide the performance of researchers, and and to go on in order to introduce new indicators that could judge the work of researchers. Actually, in 2015, in a report of the European Commission, Carlos Medas, in that year was the European Commissioner for Research, Science and Innovation, stressed that for a European Commission, open science has become a priority. So, more or less, this is, to make a very short, the story of how we arrived at the concept of open data, open access, and open research. And let's see where we are now. This is this document is an interesting report about the status and the awareness on open science in the world. As these the researchers of this that worked for this report took a longitudinal survey in all the world that was the samples of people was extremely heterogeneous because they covered many countries and many fields of research, and they collected roughly 7,000 answers, but then when they cleaned the data, they were left with 6,000 more or less. And actually, it is interesting that the awareness of a data management tool is extremely heterogeneous. And for example, even in the count, these are the first 10 countries in which the awareness is bigger. And even in that, however, it does not reach, it reaches roughly the 70%. And actually, for example, it is surprising that Japan is only at the 10th place, while, for example, United Kingdom share the first place with Ethiopia. Again, also, as I told, also in the research field, this heterogeneity is present, and the research field that behaves worse are, for example, mathematics and physics. While, for example, in social sciences and in computing, the awareness of a data management tool is bigger. Still, even if in 2012, for the first time, it was proposed to change paradigm and stopping using a bibliometric parameter to judge the work of the researchers, still in 2023, the stronger motivation to share data is getting citation. And the public benefit comes as second. Moreover, a lot of researchers complain the fact that there is no recognition from an academic point of view for sharing data. That is a lot of work, and typically there are no people that support the researcher in doing that, and that and moreover. But what I think it is interesting is that open data awareness is not correlated to the role inside the institute. So it is not true that, for example, younger researchers are more motivated to share data. And actually, we are at the point that only the 50% of the people consider important to share his own data sets. 50% could be considered even a lot, but since this kind of sensibility has started many years ago, I think 50% is not too much. Now, from a global point of view, what happens in Europe? In Europe, since 2015, with Carlo Moedas as a commissioner for research, science and innovation, we have that open data and open access became a priority. And indeed, there are a lot of initiatives inside the European community to improve, to increase this knowledge and the implementation of these principles. For example, one of these is the IOSC, that is the European Open Science Cloud. European Commission forces the production of data to be fair compliant, and I will come later to discuss what is fair, and suggest that it will be necessary, again, introducing new indicator to validate the research quality of the institution in order to encourage researchers to share data and to be fair compliant. Actually, Horizon Europe, all of you know that is the main program for research and innovation in Europe, and the next generation is part of Horizon Europe. Why I say I underline this, of course, is because PRP is sponsored by Horizon Europe. Sorry, is sponsored by Next Generation EU, but is inside Horizon Europe, and of course should be compliant with the requirement with the imposition of Next Generation EU. But it's not the end of the story, because also Italy, even if is a bit on delay and is not always clear in his with its laws, has given some guidelines to follow the process of in order to be compliant with the European law that suggested that forces the implementation of fair sorry. Actually, in it, the guidelines give all the instruments to be compliant with the European law 1024 of 2019. And there is a bit of confusion in Italy between research data and the public data, but actually research data are public data, and therefore, if of course are funded by public money, and therefore have to be compliant with the guidelines with the European law. So the message here I would like to stress is that inside PRP, fair by design is not a choice, but is a mandatory, exactly. So just to, even if it would, I started with the discussion talking about open data and open access, but of course open data are completely useless if I cannot find, if I cannot access to them, I cannot interoperate with them, I cannot reuse them. So automatically, even if I start from a concept of open data, I finish by defining what they are called the FAIR principle. That is, the principle that has been introduced for a good data management in order to make useful the concept of open data and open access. Actually, this is a very famous work, and this is almost old because it is of 2000. It was written in 2016. But what is interesting indeed is that in 2015, the commissioner, the European Commissioner, said that open access was a pillar for was a priority for the research in Europe. And indeed, these principles are, at the end of the story, the guideline for a good management of the data. What is important in this principle is that the stress that is given by the on the fact that the data and the metadata should be also machine readable. That means that they should be understood not only by a human, but also automatically by a machine. That forces the fact that the data have to be shared and have to be uploaded on given repository on a specific way by following some specific standards. Actually, the FAIR principle does not give any standards and is not a goal, but they represent a sort of method to work and to follow while trying to introducing a standard and introducing a pipeline to manage the data. Just a few words about how the FAIR principle declines. The authors indicated 15 points that the collection and the publication of the data should satisfy in order to be compliant with the FAIR principle. And for example, for what concerns the principle related to the findability, to be compliant with the FAIR principle, we should collect our data with rich metadata, publish at least the publish metadata and data on trusted repositories and in open trusted repositories, and assign a persistent identifier to both of them. In the trusted repository are a lot. Of course, some well known and more used from different communities. But of course, again, the FAIR principle does not force you to upload to only to a repositories. Of course, the European Commission promotes EOSC, but it is not compulsory. Then, just of course, I think all of you know what is a person identifier. That is a long-lasting identifier to a digital or not digital object, and the digital object is any information that can be put in a binary format. Actually, there is maybe the most famous digital PID, persistent identifier, is the DOI, that is a digital object in identifier that is designed to be used both by humans as well as a machine. For what concern metadata, metadata are all the data related to the data that describes what your data are. Of course, I think the easiest way to decide what is a metadata, in my opinion, is thinking all the information that, from experimental point of view, are all that information that allow you to reproduce your experiment. So are all that information that explain how did you collect your data, which was your instrument, which were, how was done your sample, and so on. For this reason, of course, as long as you need to collect a huge number of metadata, it is necessary to introduce the correct ontology that describe the properties and the relationship among this information. For sure, what is clear is that the correct ontology cannot be defined can be defined only by people that work in the field, by domain experts. And actually, it is one of the most difficult stages, step when somebody tries to implement in practice FAIR by design in a lab, because it requires an extreme collaboration between domain experts and data stewards and data curators that that follows the implementation of the FAIR principle. For what concerns the second point of the FAIR principle, accessibility, it concerns the fact that once you upload on a trusted repositories your data and metadata, you have to decide with which licenses you give them to the community, if they are open, closed, under an embargo, and for this reason, the 2 points, findability and accessibility, are completely two different things, because on one side we have just the fact to put your data in on a trusted repositories, and on the other side we have the aspect that concern the licenses and how you allow the other people belonging to the community to use them. Now, coming to the last 2 points of the FAIR principle, that is interoperability and usability of the data, they are strictly connected to the first point of the FAIR principle, because again they are linked with the fact that we have to collect all the metadata in the most complete way, and that this metadata had to follow a precise schema in such a way that they are machine actionable. And in these, if they are machine actionable, they guarantee the interoperability, while if they're complete, they guarantee their usability is guaranteed because of course both a human or a machine may understand exactly what the data are about. The point, an important aspect is that the FAIR principle are a methodology of work. That means that the FAIR implementation as something that has to be done from the beginning of experiment, even before the experiment starts, when the experiment is planned, to the end when the researchers publish the data. This means that it is necessary a full, deep study of the full process and of the different stages of the workflow. Just to, I introduced the FAIR principle by starting from the open concept, but and indeed the open data are useful if they are fair. But the relationship is more complex because having data fair does not mean they are open, because of course it depends how access is guaranteed. But at the same time, as I told, open data, if are not fair, are useless. What is important is that a good data management is done only if the data are fair by design. Because if I want that at the end point the data are, if I want finishing with fair data, I have to be sure to save all the metadata during the process of collection data, and this is this is realized only by a fair by design implementation. Now, for this reason, fair by design declines again in a set of principles that have to be implemented in all in all of the data life cycle, and it include different stages in their preparation, but the most interesting, the most important for sure, are the fact that one have to plan the workflow, design and prepare how to share results, and this brings to developing tools that may collect and share on open resources the data. Therefore, there is the growth of a know-how that of an important know-how that again could be used by other implementation in the future. Now, just to summarize what we have said so far. Typically in a standard lab, actually I'm not an experimentalist, but as long as I know by talking with people that works in the laboratories, many times what happens in a lab is that the lab instrumentation produce data that finish in a local server or sometimes even in the local notebook. Many metadata are produced by different sources and are saved on different formats, and sometimes that are even not digital. And many times also the data that are produced are in a proprietary format. After this collection phase, there is an analysis phase, a processing phase that ends with eventually with a publication. But many times the publication is done without taking into account, without references to data sets and metadata. And it for the scientific community is almost impossible to validate and reuse the data underlying the publication. What we would like in the picture I have described in the Fair by Design picture is that the lab instrumentation directly collect all the data in a data center or in a local server, but in open format, and that also metadata and all the metadata are saved automatically through a pipeline in a format that are machine actionable. And of course, this should be done with an automatic pipeline in order to have standard, to use standards in the naming convention and in the formats. If we collect the data in this way, once we analyze and eventually publish our data, automatically the publication may be linked directly to the data and to the metadata, ensuring therefore the correct data provenance. And moreover, publishing a paper with a correct link to the data and to its metadata allow the scientific community to trust the publication, to validate the results, and eventually to use the data. Just, of course, somebody could ask why we don't know, why we don't work in the old way, and then once we have finished and published the paper, try to validate, to reconstruct it, to reconstruct the data provenance, and to collect back all the metadata and put the metadata eventually collected through with different sources altogether. The reason is that going back, the process of verification, that means verified a posteriori, is extremely expensive and never complete, because more time passes, more information typically I lose, and more time is spent, more is expensive. So what, coming to my conclusion, a fair by design approach is the unique way to guarantee that all the data you collect in your experiment is correctly enriched with all metadata. Is the unique way because, as I said in the last slide, the verification is that is making the data fair a posteriori is too expensive and never complete. Of course, what is important is fair by design is not free, because it requires a huge collaboration between the different players, that is researchers, data curator, data engineering, and a lot of time in looking for the tools that are at the disposal. Is not free because it has to be also maintained in time, and because the instrumentation get updated, and sometimes the requirements may change. And however, fair by design is the only, thanks to the automation of the pipeline, is the only way to guarantee the interoperability of the metadata, last but not least, by implementing a fair by design approach in a lab, this does not mean that lab produce fair data, because of course, to be compliant with fair principle, you have to publish also them and giving access to them in a correct way. That means by putting the correct licenses and so on, according to the FAIR rules. In Velade, we are a few people that works, a group of people that works on these things, and there is Matteo, that is a researcher, Marco, that will give the talk in January about how to put in practice fair by design principle, Margherita, and Virginia and Cecilia, that are the youngest part of the team. And I think this is actually this is a very good opportunity that LAD has in this moment to try to implement a fair by design in the lab that belongs to the PRP project, because even if, as I showed in the first slides, these ideas still start to be older, I mean, because they were suggested 10, 15 years ago. There are not many labs that have implemented in practice these principles, and moreover, there is a huge movement around how to do this. So it is a good opportunity and a good challenge for our group. So thank you.